All right, Kevin, back with you for another episode of the $1 Million Relationships Podcast. And today I'm here with Wayne Mullins. Wayne, welcome. So awesome to have you on the show, man.
Thank you, Kevin. I'm excited about this chat today.
You know what? I am too. I am totally stoked about this. So, you know, you and I want to give a shout out to Jessica and the folks over at the podcast guest platform because I don't even remember how I found out about them, but I ended up getting on their mailing list. And so they send me a couple emails every week with, a group of like, I think 10 or 15 potential podcast guests. But beyond that, this gal, Jessica, who works there, for whatever reason, she got a hold of me about a year ago and she was like, Kevin, we'd like to feature your podcast on our platform and stuff. And she goes, we're just going to get you a whole bunch of guests all at once. And I was like, all right. I was like, how much is that? I was expected to invest financially for that. And she goes, Kevin, we're not going to charge you anything for this because she goes, you are really serving us and our guests. And so we're just going to do that for you. And I'm like, okay. And it was such a cool experience. And now they also had this thing where, Kev, would anybody that you interview, would you share the links with us so that we can see? And I've started interviewing so many of their people that now she has just she reaches out to me personally all the time now. And tells me, Kevin, I think this person would be a really great person for you to interview for $1 Million Relationships. And she did that with you and I, Wade. She introduced me to you that way. And the cool thing is, Jessica has not once steered me wrong. Every time she has suggested somebody, it was like right on. It was an amazing interview. And so I was looking forward to this right from the get-go.
No pressure. I can't let Jessica down now.
Right.
If I blow this, I blow the record.
But then after you and I spoke before, probably about, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks ago. And then we found out that we had this mutual friend in Jesse Elder. And as soon as I found out, and you shared that picture, we were with him at dinner somewhere, him and a couple other entrepreneurs, and I was like, all right, this just got real now, because Jesse, I have known Jesse for 12 years, and I have a very close relationship with Jesse. We've done a lot of stuff together. We've become very good friends. He was a mentor to me. Well, he still is, really. But I was investing with him for 3 years straight. I had talking with him weekly and investing in his health. And that guy holds such a place in my life that anybody else who spends time with that guy and that he would let into his world, they're my kind of people. And when I found out you were one of those people, I'm like, oh yeah, Wayne's my kind of people. And I'm really excited about getting to know him more now.
Yeah, it's so interesting though. I mean, and that's what your whole show is about. It's about those relationships, and it's about how, when we're in the right circles and when we're choosing to invest in relationships,
yeah,
miracles happen.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do. Absolutely. So what I want to do is I want to start by just turning it over to you, Wayne, so that we can set a little bit of context here. And you can share, what you do, who you serve, what inspires you most about the work you guys do and the impact you're making. And let's start there.
Absolutely. So, I am an entrepreneur through and through. That is my heart, my passion. I live in a small town, Alexandria, Louisiana, population 48,000. So no real, superpower connections here, not a lot of money here, just a very small rural town. And so for me, investing in and being super intentional about relationships has been a common thread throughout my entrepreneurial journey. Because of the fact I am in this rural place. And so I have to be intentional about fostering relationships with great people who are doing great things. Mm-hmm. But my journey actually began in sales. I love sales. Thanks to Zig Ziglar. Zig Ziglar started me down that path and convinced me that selling was the best profession in the world. And Absolutely love selling. That kind of just transitioned over time into me starting a company and selling for myself, selling our services. Over the course of a 3-year period, Kevin, I grew that company to a large enough size to sell, had multiple offers for that company, sold it. And during that process, I started having other entrepreneurs reach out to me and say, hey, we see how fast you're growing your company. What are you doing? Like, how are you growing so rapidly? And the answer was always marketing. We were doing some very unique, very specific marketing things. Those conversations turned into consulting, which then turned into this idea of maybe doing an agency. And here we are, 15, almost 16 years later. We have a full service marketing agency from right here in this little town.
Wow. Wow. And so, who is your ideal client for your marketing agency, Wayne?
Yeah. So, unlike a lot of agencies, we don't have a specific niche or
Okay.
niche, however you want to say that. Um, the two common elements, though, across the board with all of our clients are this. Number one, they are entrepreneurial. So, when I say that, I mean they're willing to challenge the status quo, they're willing to think outside the box, right? They don't want to just do the tried and true traditional stuff. They're willing to push the envelope a bit. And then two, they're growth minded. In other words, they're not just happy with, slow, moderate growth. They're actually seeking to grow at a rapid pace, whether that's through growth or through scale.
Okay. Very cool. Very cool. It's interesting. You're like me in a lot of ways because the clients that I serve, I don't give a dang what business they're in. I care about who they are, and there's certain things. I mean, every one of my clients are people who are beyond the place where they need to create cash flow for sustainability in their business. They're now focused on how do I use my business to make my biggest impact.
Mm.
And on the other side of the coin, they are just some of the most giving, generous people I know. They always show up ready to help, to serve, to contribute, to pour into others. They couldn't show up any other way because that's who they are.
Yeah.
And if they show up that way, it's like, oh, I could totally rock their world,
Right. Yeah.
And I don't give a dang what they do.
Yeah.
And so,
It's very counterintuitive. I get that question and I get that pressure oftentimes from people who don't really know me. That they talk about how much more we could systemize and how it'd be so much easier if all of our clients were the same. And because one thing's going to be exactly the same for the other, you just change the name.
yep.
And to be honest with you, I would be so bored doing that, right?
Yeah.
Doing the same thing over and over and changing the name is not appealing to me. I love the challenge of switching between industries and having to learn their customers, learn their business, and learn to speak to those people in completely different ways.
And it probably comes down to being able to use your God-given unique abilities to be able to serve the people that you can. And like doing templated stuff over and over and over wouldn't be that.
No, not for me. I mean, for some people, they're happy with that. They're
Yeah.
content with that. But for me, I'm not a you know factory assembly line type of guy. I want
Yeah.
something unique. I want something different, and those are the people I work with. Those are the clients that we serve best.
Yeah. Yeah. So give us an example, and you don't have to, talk about names of companies or people or anything, but give us an example of somebody that you were just able to help in a really big and powerful way that you're just really proud of that outcome or that result.
Sure. I'm gonna give you two different ones.
Okay.
The first one I'm gonna give you is, in the business world, it's the sexy story. It's the story you would read about in, Inc. or a Forbes magazine. So we started working with this client. They're in the home services industry. We
Okay.
started working with them about 6 years ago, maybe slightly more than that now. And at the time, they were doing about 22 million in total revenue per year.
Okay.
They brought us on to work at the top of their funnel with lead generation, specifically on social media channels. So that was our focus. That is our job. So top of their funnel, getting people into their sales system, so that their service reps could reach out, could call, set appointments, go out and do all that stuff. Fast forward to today, this year they will do $1 billion in revenue. So in a
Wow.
6-year period, 22 million to a billion in revenue. Phenomenal
Wow.
growth.
Yeah.
Just an amazing company, amazing entrepreneurs. But that story is the sexy story. But the one that I get the most, I'm the most proud of,
Mhm.
and the one that I really look back on with just it's the one that I've enjoyed serving the most. There's a good friend of mine who owns a local coffee shop, and he went through a really dark period in his life, and he actually committed suicide. Uh, his wife was then left. She was a school teacher. She was then left with this local small coffee shop. And as you can imagine, just the sheer trauma of experiencing that. You're a teacher, your husband was running this local coffee shop, and now you're kind of stuck here trying to figure out, do I keep running it? Do I teach? What do I do? And so my role in that particular situation was very different. But I'm most proud of the fact of who she has become as an entrepreneur, and just the little bit of support and guidance and encouragement that I could give her along the way to take her husband's vision that he could never bring to life and actually bring that into fulfillment now. So
Wow.
that's the story, and those are the type of stories though that mean the most to me. I mean, in terms of dollars, there's no comparison.
Totally.
One's
Totally.
hundreds of millions of dollars, the other one's hundreds of thousands a year. But the impact on someone's life and ultimately getting to carry out someone's legacy is incredibly meaningful.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. I just lost a close friend of mine last week, so that story really hit home. Right, and I, especially last week, a lot of pain last week, and a lot of healing going on too at the same exact time. But it's been so cool to see the just massive outpouring of love and support for his family, for his wife, and their four daughters that now no longer have their dad. And it's been so beautiful to see that, and how, because he was just a guy who was making such an impact in the world. He was loved by so many people, and his family. I mean, yeah, they no longer have a husband and a father, and Lindsay is, but I'll tell you what, they're going to be okay. They're going to be okay because that business is going to go. And in fact, I feel right now at this point, a week and a half into this, that I think that business is going to be even more powerful going forward from here. Because his legacy will carry on, and there's so many people that are just like committed to helping make that happen and stuff. And it's just such a beautiful thing to see. And so. Yeah, and you're right. I mean, like the big sexy story, 22 million to what? How many ever billion? I mean, what? That's a big sexy story for sure. But the other one, that is just, if not more valuable than the big money sexy story too.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
it's all just, what a beautiful impact. Okay, so now that we've got a little bit of context, I love doing that piece of it, and then now transitioning. So I'm gonna reiterate the question around relationships for the benefit of our listeners, and we'll just shift our conversation a little bit. So Wayne, have you ever been introduced to a person or persons who completely changed the course of your life or your business, so much so that much of what you have today would not be possible if not for this person or persons? And I'm just really excited to hear your story around this topic of relationships.
Absolutely. I love this question. And for me, there's definitely a couple of people that come to mind.
Okay.
I I mentioned one earlier, and that is Zig Ziglar.
Yeah.
I was introduced to Zig Ziglar when I was probably 20, 21 years old,
Okay.
through some CDs of his, and they were on selling. I don't remember the exact title, but Zig Ziglar, for I'm sure you're familiar, but for those maybe who aren't, so he was a motivational speaker and sales trainer. That's what he was. And quite arguably, probably the biggest and best during his time. I mean, most well known, taught all over the world. And he introduced me to this idea of selling and the career and the profession of selling. And, I, by default, I'm introvert. I want to go hide in the room. I don't want to be out in public. So this whole idea of going out and knocking on doors was completely and totally terrifying to me. But he put me on this path of, number one, challenging my own assumptions about myself, my own limiting beliefs. He would use slightly different terms, but he put me on this path. The other path that he put me on was one of continual improvement and choosing to invest in myself. Those two things, number one, the selling portion, the number two, choosing to invest in myself and view myself and the money I spend on myself as the number one investment and number one asset that I have in this world. Those two beliefs and those two ideas completely altered the future of my life. Those two things.
Yeah, yeah. That man, you are totally speaking to the choir on that, because I've done the same thing, invested in myself, and you know what? That's the best investment we could possibly make. And
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and okay. So you mentioned that there was one other person that you want to honor too, and I want to make sure I give you the opportunity to do that before I ask any other questions.
Yeah. The other person's my wife, Kevin. My
Okay.
wife, Heather. We've been married almost 22 years now.
Wow, congratulations. That's
Thank
awesome.
you. And, you know, she is the unsung hero behind my quote unquote success, behind the business, behind our family. Um, in the early days of growing this specific business, things were tough. Like I mentioned earlier, I'd sold a previous company. And during the course of growing that company and then subsequently selling that company, we were doing quite well. We had just moved into a new house. We had just bought 50 acres of land where we were going to build our dream house. We had the boat, we had the two new cars. We were vacations all the time, like, at least a weekend getaway every single month. And starting this company, things quickly went the other direction. In those first few years, I was great at selling things. I sold our house. I had to sell both our vehicles. We had to sell the boat. We had to sell the 50 acres of land that we'd bought. And then it got to the point where, my wife, we replaced her brand new car with a minivan that had a messed up transmission. So what would happen, Kevin, you'd pull up to a red light and you would start going again, and the transmission would get stuck in first gear. And so you'd have to pull over on the side of the road. You'd have to put the van in park, turn it off, turn it back on, and it would somehow magically reset the transmission. And so this was, and I as well had a used, not so fancy car, but that was the family vehicle, her van. And the company wasn't doing well. I mean, we'd moved from a really nice 2,200 square foot home. We moved into a 700 square foot rental. My third son was born at the time, and his crib was in the kitchen because there was no room anywhere else. So he was living in the kitchen. And it came to the point where I knew I had to do something different. Everything I was trying wasn't working. And I knew I needed a coach. I needed someone who could see things that I couldn't see. And so my wife and I had this conversation. We had virtually no money. And it was, do we get the minivan fixed, provide safety for them as they, travel, go around town? Or do we use that little bit of money every month to hire a coach for me? And she agreed that the coach would be a long-term worthwhile investment. And I wish I could tell you that things magically changed over the course of a month or 2 months, but she ended up having to drive that van for almost 18 more months while we chose to invest in a coach. And that's just one sacrifice that she's made over the years, for me, for our family. And so I wouldn't be where I am today. The company wouldn't be where we are today if it wasn't for her and her willingness and belief in me. And I think so many times, just in general, in success, there's so often people behind the scenes that we can't see, who don't want the limelight. Like, I get to come here, I get to visit with you, I get to visit with people, and my face is associated with the company. And yeah, there's people behind the scenes, like my wife, and I think it's true for so many, that behind the scenes there's these unsung heroes. There's these strong people who stand in the back and support and guide us, and are cheerleaders for us, both literally and metaphorically for us.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Man, I could relate with so much of that story, because it sounds like you were describing my life for a couple of year period too and stuff. And in 5 more days, my wife and I will be celebrating our 19th wedding anniversary. And I am so incredibly grateful for that woman. And in those, I have been through times just like what you're describing. And, as a husband and a father, I don't know about you, but boy, that took a toll on me, because I felt like I was totally letting my wife and children down. I wasn't providing like I wanted to.
Yeah. Yep.
And yet she stuck with me through every bit of that and supported me and was like, honey, you got this. And she saw in me sometimes what I didn't necessarily see in myself. Jesse, oh my God, talk about a guy who sees in you what you might not see for yourself and helps point that out for you. He's done that for me too, and man, yeah, we're two blessed guys, Wade. We are two incredibly blessed guys. And so
Absolutely, completely agree. And I for me, what I would say is that, for people, like interacting with people like a Jesse or a Zig Ziglar, those have to be intentional, right? And I think sometimes that, for me, I used to use the excuse, I'm in this small town. There's no people here that can really help me get what I want to get, go where I want to go, all that type of stuff. And so I think it's so important that we choose to invest in ourselves. We choose to invest in those relationships, because at the end of the day, all business, all of life is about relationships.
Yeah. 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 So if you look at these two relationships that you have talked about, Zig and then your wife, what's an example of where you personally got to make a really substantial impact, where you're just like, maybe even be a little bit surprised that, like, wow, that was way cool. Then you also know, hands down, that would have never happened if not for the relationship that you had with Zig and or your wife. What's an example of that where you were empowered because of one of these relationships?
Yeah, I mean, Zig Ziglar, going back to that one. So one interesting thing, I had the privilege of going to lunch with Zig Ziglar and his wife. My wife and I had lunch with them. And one of the most fascinating things to me, because he was my hero, I'd listened to every single, program that he'd ever put out, read every single book. And we go to this lunch. And the most fascinating thing was this, that he was a high level introvert. His wife was the one who was the super personable one who carried the conversation. And so for me, that was an aha moment. It's like, he can accomplish the things he accomplished as this introvert. Mm-hmm. And so again, I mentioned this earlier, but I'm an introvert, right? And I always avoided social things. I always avoided, and I just thought there were so many limitations on my life because of that identity, if you will. Mm-hmm. But to be honest with you, if it weren't for Zig, I wouldn't have the business I have today, because of the belief in myself and the way he challenged me to think about who I actually am and what I'm capable of.
Yeah.
Um, those relationships, I could trace relationship like a thread, if you will, like Jesse and the thread of those relationships all stem from this idea of choosing to invest in relationships like with Zig Ziglar.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I've had the privilege of working with some amazing, amazing people. Um, I've had the privilege, for example, of we've done work for the Michael Jackson estate, um, done work for numerous New York Times bestselling authors, helping them launch their books and get their books on the New York Times list, Fortune 100 companies. And again, I'm in a little tiny town, 48,000 people in the middle of nowhere. It comes because and through relationships.
Yeah. Yeah. Amen. Yeah. Well, for anybody that's listening to this right now going, dang, Kev, this was a really great conversation. I really love Wayne. I love who he is. I love how he shows up. And now I'm even curious more about them and the work that they do. How can anybody find out more about you guys? Any websites, any resources we can share with them, Wayne?
Yeah, the simplest place, Kevin's our website. It's just uglymugmarketing.com. We've got
Okay.
email addresses, phone numbers, all our social channels are linked from that.
Okay.
So that'd be probably the easiest place.
Perfect. Perfect. Well, I'll tell you, I really appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation today and just share from your heart. Any last thing you feel led to share before we call it a wrap?
The thing that I would say, Kevin, is that consistency creates miracles. I think so often that maybe I'm speaking just to me here, but I'm wired in such a way that I love the next big idea. I love the things that are out of the box and creative. And I love to jump from thing to thing, right? I get bored easily. That's why earlier I talked about I love working in so many different industries. But one of the core lessons that I've had to learn is being consistent in the little things creates miracles over time.
Yeah. Amen. Amen. And yeah, I've been experiencing a whole lot of that. And it's like, yeah, it's pretty cool. Just being us, showing up, being the steward, the best steward that we can of our God-given gifts and abilities, and just using them and whether you want to call it God, the universe, what have you. You know what? We are too. If we want to be there, I know I've experienced it. I am 100% co-creating and collaborating with God in the universe. I just know it. I experience it all the time because I'm like, wow, there's no way you even saw that coming, but yet you just facilitated. You were just the vessel that it just happened to be able to go through you. So, and pretty, and you're right. Miracles happen all the time, and we just gotta be open to that. Well, Wayne, thank you so much for just taking the time to have this conversation. I really appreciate it. Really appreciate you. And I am totally stoked to get this out and share it with a whole lot of other entrepreneurs. So thank you again.
Thank you so much for the great conversation, Kevin. Keep up what you're doing. It's making a
Will
difference.
do. Will do.